Welcome to Puzzle Proof. Join us as we unravel today's captivating story and solve exciting puzzles together. Get ready to engage your mind. Let the journey start. Chapter 1. A disturbing commission. The fog lay heavy over Baker Street that morning, curling through the gaslight like a living thing. Within 221B, Sherlock Holmes sat motionless in his familiar armchair, the lamplight casting sharp highlights on his hawk-like features. His long, slender fingers were steepled beneath his chin, and his dark eyes, luminous with intelligence, flicked from one object to another as though searching for hidden truths. Across the room, Dr. John Watson bustled in from the chilly London air, the hem of his overcoat dotted with dew, and his moustache still flecked with raindrops. "Holmes," I greeted, hanging my dripping coat on the stand. "You are still at that invitation. Has it arrived at last?" Holmes allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile to curve his lips. He held up a slender card, the edges gilt in gold, and turned it carefully under the lamplight. "Indeed, Watson, Lady Eleanor Chaucer of Grosvenor Square extends her entreaty for our services. Her late husband's casket, an heirloom of priceless family documents, has disappeared from a locked cabinet in her drawing room. She begs for discretion." I took the card from Holmes's hand and read the elegant, flowing script. "Grosvenor Square is hardly our usual haunt, Holmes, but Lady Chaucer comes highly recommended. Shall we call at once?" Holmes rose with his customary calm. "Pray do not mistake haste for efficiency, my dear Watson. We shall take a cab. There is little benefit in rushing headlong into an unknown situation. Attention to detail matters far more." Within the hour, we rattled through damp streets to one of London's grandest addresses. A gunmetal-coloured hansom deposited us at a broad facade of stucco and wrought iron. Holmes, who never wasted a gesture, noted at once the immaculate upkeep of the entrance and the faint gleam of gilt on the letterbox. He caught my puzzled glance. "Lady Chaucer, I suspect, values propriety above all, Watson. We must show respect." The drawing room to which we were shown was a study in restrained opulence. Ivory damask on the walls, polished mahogany furniture, and a single crimson casket atop a petite cabinet near the hearth. Lady Eleanor Chaucer herself awaited us, a slim, fair woman of middle age, her cheeks high and her eyes large and troubled. She curtsied with practiced grace. "Thank you for coming so promptly," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I scarcely know where to begin. My husband commissioned that casket for our wedding anniversary 2 years past. He admired its bird motifs and the craftsmanship of its jeweller. Within lay papers of vast consequence to my family, letters, deeds, wills. Last night I placed it locked in the cabinet, as always, and retired. This morning, it was gone." Holmes's gaze settled upon the cabinet. Its surface bore no scratch or sign of forced entry. The lock mechanism seemed intact. The door itself was undisturbed, save for a minute smudge on the sill. He rose and approached, stooping to examine the polished parquet. "Observe, Watson," he said in a low voice. "These impressions here, barely thicker than a fingernail, indicate the cabinet was gently slid sideways. Someone knew precisely how to avoid creaking floorboards. Lady Chaucer followed his gaze. But who would have that knowledge? We have no servants in the house at present, only myself and a housemaid, Miss Blount. The absence of servants altogether is itself noteworthy," Holmes murmured. He rose to inspect the hearth. A faint trace of violet perfume lingered in the air, more concentrated here than elsewhere. He inhaled once, then withdrew a slender scrap of violet-hued fabric from his cuff. Watson noted the fabric's fine weave and subtle sheen. "Madame," Holmes addressed Lady Chaucer, "I understand you keep scented sachets in this cabinet?" Eleanor pale-facedly admitted she did. though the scent was meant for linen drawers rather than public display. Holmes tucked the fabric into an evidence envelope. "Finally," he said, "this small smear of mud caught by the grate. Too fresh to have been brushed in from outside. Whoever removed the casket must have trailed soil here, then hastily wiped their shoes." Watson frowned. "Could it have been our housemaid?" he ventured. Holmes shook his head. "Miss Blount has been in my employ before and bears no sign of duplicity. Besides, the thief displayed an intimate knowledge of this room's layout, knowledge only a familiar guest or close acquaintance might possess." Lady Chaucer drew a trembling breath. "My dear friend, Dr. Philip Rivers, visited last evening. He often called here to discuss charitable matters. Could he be involved?" Holmes inclined his head. "An excellent hypothesis. We shall call upon Dr. Rivers directly. Watson, we shall pay Penton Street a visit." Turning to Lady Chaucer, he added, "Madame, rest assured of our discretion. Pray leave all matters of hospitality to me and attend solely to your peace of mind." Dr. Rivers's residence, a narrow townhouse halfway down Penton Street, was a tastefully appointed abode, its study lined with medical texts and botanical charts. Rivers himself greeted us in a tweed jacket, his manner composed and courteous. "Holmes, Watson, how good of you to call," he said, extending a steady hand. His manner betrayed no surprise. "I hear of your dilemma. Disappeared, you say? How extraordinary." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Indeed. Pray offer some tea, doctor." As Rivers fetched the refreshments, Holmes examined the room in silence. Watson, seated, conferred in hushed tones with Lady Chaucer's maid, whom Rivers had invited along to identify any personal effects. The maid, Miss Blount, shook her head. None of her garments bore the violet scent or the mud smear. When tea arrived, Holmes settled to sip with deliberate calm. Watson's journal later recorded, "Holmes carried his cup with 2 steady hands, but the saucer bore a microscopic fleck of mud matching that by the Chaucer hearth, evidence that Dr. Rivers himself had either visited the scene of the theft or contrived a ruse. Holmes, via his penetrating gaze, noted the doctor's practiced neatness as he arranged the tray. Yet, upon the tea things, he spotted a tiny petal, crushed and violet in hue, the match for the sachet fragrance. Moreover, the doctor's tan sleeve bore a torn seam, the violet fabric scrap Holmes now produced. Rivers blanched. "My gardening glove," he stammered. "I left it at Lady Chaucer's drawing room when I watered her orchids last night." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Your glove bears no trace of rose petals, Doctor, but the casket room's parquet shows no sign of such horticultural activity. Furthermore, the mud smear upon your saucer indicates your presence at Grosvenor Square subsequent to the theft." Rivers's composure wavered. Watson rose in alarm. Holmes gently placed a hand on Rivers's arm. "Dr. Rivers, I require your explanation." The doctor swallowed. "Very well, Holmes, I admit I entered the drawing room last night, but only to retrieve a misplaced prescription. I encountered the thief, I cannot say who, yet I dared not challenge them. I fled, leaving behind my glove and these traces." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. "An intriguing confession, Doctor, yet unhelpful in identifying your accomplice." He pocketed the glove fragment. "Do you recall any distinguishing feature of the thief?" Rivers hesitated. "I saw a flash of scarlet in the mourner's cloak, and they spoke with a distinctly foreign accent, that is all." Holmes allowed a moment's silence, then bowed. "Thank you. Your candour assists our inquiries. Good day, Doctor, we shall take our leave." Back in Baker Street, as the gaslight flared through the gathering dusk, Holmes settled at his desk and began to scribble an observation. I watched him, marvelling at the serenity with which he pieced together disparate clues. "Watson," he said at length, placing his pen aside. "We have 3 threads, the violet perfume, the mud smear, and the foreign accent. Our next step lies not in London, but beyond it." I leaned forward. "Where to, Holmes?" He closed his eyes, fingertips pressed together. "Gravesend Chapel, on the river's south bank. That foreign accent likely originates from the nearby docks. Something tells me the casket may be hidden in that precinct." I felt a surge of anticipation. The game, as Holmes often reminded me, was afoot, and from that modest commission on Grosvenor Square, we were already sailing into unknown waters. Chapter 2. The Doctor's Alibi. A crisp morning breeze still clung to the lampposts of Baker Street when Holmes and I set out for Penton Street. The carriage rattled over cobbles slick with last night's drizzle, and Holmes sat silent, eyes half closed, reviewing the scant clues in his mind. Once, as the carriage lurched, I ventured, "You seem lost in thought, Holmes. Does the trail point to a particular suspect?" He opened one eye and fixed me with a steady look. "Our suspect, Watson, is one whose profession demands precision of hand and mind. The glove, the violet scent, and that mud smear all point to Dr. Philip Rivers." He tapped his temple lightly. "Today we test his alibi. At Dr. Rivers's well-kept residence, we found his study bathed in pale daylight, the blinds drawn against the glare. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of medical tomes, botanical prints, and jars of labelled specimens. A sturdy mahogany desk stood before a casement window of mottled glass. Upon it lay an open ledger, quills, and a small bronze inkwell. Holmes paused at the threshold, breathing in the faint tang of antiseptic and tea. Dr. Rivers himself emerged from a side room, donned in a tweed jacket that spoke of country walks. His hair was carefully groomed, his manner composed. "Gentlemen," he greeted us, offering a measured bow, "how may I assist you this fine morning?" Holmes inclined his head. "We come at the behest of Lady Eleanor Chaucer. Her husband's family casket has vanished. You visited Grosvenor Square last night. Pray, recount your movements." Rivers's expression remained placid. "I was invited to consult on a philanthropic endeavour an evening at Lady Chaucer's, discussing her charitable foundation. I arrived around 8, took tea with her ladyship, and departed about 10. On returning home, I reviewed medical notes until midnight." Holmes's gaze flickered to the desk's polished surface, then to the inkwell. He noticed a tiny fleck of violet-toned dust upon the rim of the silver tea tray. "Tea, you say?" he murmured. "We observed remnants of such dust in Lady Chaucer's drawing-room." The doctor's composure wavered just a fraction. "Ah, yes, I wore a sachet in my coat pocket. Violet affords a pungent bouquet, does it not?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Indeed, yet the sachet is kept within the cabinet where the casket vanished. How did you acquire the fragrance?" Rivers cleared his throat. I borrowed her ladyship's perfume. My own robes lacked a scent suited to refined company." He offered a strained chuckle. While Rivers spoke, Holmes's eyes had drifted lower, to the scuffed floorboards beneath the desk. There lay the faint imprint of a boot heel, its thread pattern one of continental manufacture. Holmes bent to study it. "Curious," he said quietly to Watson, "that this mark appears here, but no such boots are kept by Lady Chaucer." Watson raised an eyebrow but held his tongue. Holmes continued his silent scrutiny, tilting his head as if listening to the house itself. He noticed the faint tick of a rare Swiss carriage clock on the mantel, synchronized to Greenwich time, unlikely to falter by more than a second. At length, Holmes turned back to Rivers. "Your account seems precise, yet our observations yield discrepancies. This fleck of mud," he held aloft a minute grain picked from the tea saucer, Matches that of Lady Chaucer's hearth. How came it upon your fine china?" Rivers's lip quivered. He glanced at the cup and then at a faint smudge upon his polished cuff. "I must have trodden in the garden last eve. I cleaned my boots here after entering. The mud I forgot to brush fully." Holmes noted his manner, calm but not entirely convincing. He set down the saucer and moved purposefully to a bureau against the far wall. With a gentle nod to Rivers, he unlocked its top drawer with a borrowed skeleton key supplied by Lady Chaucer. Inside lay a small gold locket, its surface engraved with an ornate family crest, a pair of starlings in flight. Holmes extracted it and flipped it open. Within, a scrap of parchment bore a ciphered initial. G.C. The paper was torn, edges singed, ink slightly smudged. Holmes held it up to the light. "This fragment matches the secret will Mrs. Chaucer once mentioned. It was encoded in her late husband's cipher. You are familiar with it, I trust." The doctor paled. I observed it in his study, although I should not have taken it. It seemed of no importance until now." He swallowed hard, eyes darting about the room as though seeking escape. Holmes replaced the locket and regarded Rivers with unwavering calm. "Doctor, these coincidences are too apt. You know the cipher, you have the violet sachet, and you've brought mud into your study. Pray, tell us, why steal the casket? What were you hoping to find?" Rivers's shoulders slumped. He sank into a leather chair and ran a hand through his hair. "Very well, Holmes. I admit I entered the drawing room after tea. I wished to examine the casket, its seals, the ciphered lock, hoping to discover a clue to Lady Chaucer's hidden philanthropy. My intentions were honourable. I foresaw no harm." Holmes's lips curved in a thin line. "Honourable curiosity may lead to unintentional crimes, Doctor. Yet your admission does not account for the disappearance of the documents within, nor does it explain why you fled so hastily." Before Rivers could reply, I stepped forward. "Holmes, the cipher G.C., could it denote Gravesend Chapel, the chapel near the docks Lady Chaucer's late husband once visited?" Holmes's eyes sharpened at my suggestion. "Precisely, Watson," he said softly. "A map among the casket's papers indicated the chapel's crypt, reputed to house private vaults. The late Mr. Chaucer may have hidden something there." Rivers sprang up. "You must be mistaken. I know nothing of such a vault." Holmes produced a pressed violet blossom, carefully dried, its petals intact. "This flower, Watson?" he asked. "Not one grown in Lady Chaucer's English rose garden, but of a variety imported from Persia. Only one guest, as far as we know, has ties to that region. Miss Isabel Hartley, governess to the Chaucer niece." Rivers's jaw tightened. "Hartley? But she left Grosvenor Square weeks ago." Holmes inclined his head. "Yet she may have returned surreptitiously if she carried designs upon these papers. All that remains is to inspect Gravesend Chapel." Rivers sank back onto his chair, defeated. "Very well, Holmes, I will accompany you, though I fear Miss Hartley's name is innocent of this affair." Holmes turned to me, eyes alight with purpose. "Watson, fetch the cab. We depart for Gravesend at once. Our doctor's alibi has proven less than watertight, and another suspect emerges from the shadows. The game grows ever more intricate." As I hurried out to secure our conveyance, Holmes paused to gather his coat and hat, his mind already racing ahead to the next clue. Never had I seen him more animated. That calm detachment so prized was tempered now by an eagerness I recognized as the thrill of nearing truth. In that instant I understood fully the depths of his brilliance. Where one sees only a physician's courtesy, he discerns the furtive thief. Where one finds mere coincidence, he unveils intention. Our path was clear. Gravesend Chapel awaited, and with it, perhaps the secret to unlocking the mystery of the Crimson Casket. Chapter 3. The Red Cottage. A brisk wind swept off the Thames as Holmes and I stepped from the rattling cab onto the gravel drive of a modest red-brick cottage. The late afternoon sun slanted obliquely across its weathered walls, revealing creeping ivy and the faintest scar of old mortar where a window had once been. Holmes studied the structure with his customary stillness, fingers lightly brushing the lapels of his Inverness cape. "This is Gravesend's Guildford Road," he murmured. "Miss Isabel Hartley lodged here until recently. Her abrupt departure coincided with the disappearance of Lady Chaucer's casket." I followed Holmes up the path to the low, canopied porch. A single lamp burned within the casement window, casting a warm pool of light onto the doorstep. We knocked. After a moment's pause, the door opened to admit a slender young woman in simple garments, a high-collared blouse of soft muslin, and a dark woolen skirt. Her chestnut hair was tucked neatly beneath a plain bonnet, and her large grey eyes betrayed anxiety. "Miss Hartley?" Holmes inquired gently, raising a gloved hand in greeting. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We come at Lady Chaucer's request to make certain all is well. May we enter?" Hartley's colour rose, but she stepped back to admit us. Inside, the cottage was cosier than its austere exterior suggested. A small hearth with a smouldering fire, a tidy oak table littered with books and writing implements, and a curtained alcove that served as her bedchamber. Despite the homeliness, an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the air. I have no wish to trouble you, Mr. Holmes," Hartley stammered, ushering us to seats by the fire. "My departure was arranged weeks ago. What business do you have with me?" Holmes sank into a straight-backed chair, folding his hands. "We have traced various clues. Your former employment as governess to Lady Chaucer's niece, the presence of your perfume in her drawing room, and a fragment of parchment in Dr. Rivers's possession bearing the cipher used by the late Mr. Chaucer." He paused to let the implication settle. "Pray, did you ever handle that casket?" Hartley's gaze flickered to the hearth. She pressed her hands together. "Yes. I admired it on the day of Mrs. Chaucer's last gathering. Its workmanship is exquisite, and the cipher," I prompted. "Did you know of the scrap found in Dr. Rivers's study?" Her lips tightened. "I saw the ciphered documents once, in Mr. Chaucer's private papers. He entrusted them to me for safekeeping when illness detained him abroad. I burned certain pages that I deemed too dangerous, pages that implicated members of his own family in disgraceful dealings." Holmes inclined his head. "A prudent action, perhaps, but your departure coincided with the theft. One might conclude that you returned to recover what you destroyed." Hartley hesitated, eyes brimming. "I would never steal from Lady Chaucer. I burned those pages out of loyalty. I left this cottage last night only to fetch my belongings from a trunk at the inn. I did not return to Gravesend until after midnight." Holmes's expression remained placid. "Your alibi extends only until the palace clock struck work's end. Can any confirm your return time?" She glanced about the room, then whispered, "The innkeeper heard me arrive at 12:30, but he dismissed me quickly. He refused to record the hour." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, please escort Miss Hartley to the inn and secure her trunk for inspection. I shall examine this cottage further." As Watson and Hartley departed, Holmes rose and circled the room, eyes flicking to the hearth and across the table. He crouched to inspect the flagstones before the fireplace, tracing a pattern of faint soot smudges that led toward the alcove. Following the trail, he uncovered a small patch of scorched earth just inside the curtained recess, evidence of recent combustion. Holmes broke off a charred leaf from the hearth and held it to the light. Its edges were curled and brittle. "These are indeed remnants of paper, Watson," he called softly. "Likely pages of a diary or manuscript." Returning with Watson and the trunk, I watched Holmes place the fragments carefully into a folded sheet of paper. He then unlocked the trunk's brass clasp with a slender instrument from his pocket. Inside lay clean linens and a few personal effects, but no sign of recently burned pages. Miss Hartley assured us her remaining papers are intact, I remarked. Holmes nodded. Yet here we have evidence to the contrary. Either she left the incriminating pages elsewhere, or she meant us to find this decoy. He studied the smoulder, and then the neat seam of the alcove's curtain. Note how the stitching here is new. The curtain was recently resewn, presumably to conceal a hidden recess. He tugged at the fabric near the floor, revealing a narrow lath behind which lay a small cavity in the wall. Inside was a sheaf of singed documents tied with ribbon. Holmes extracted them and turned the brittle pages over in his hands. These are the missing will codicils, Watson. The smoke-stained ink still legible. And they confirm that Lady Chaucer's niece inherited the family fortune in the event of her own demise. Hartley watched with tears brimming. Yes, I burned the pages to spare my pupil the burden of suspicion. I feared the knowledge would drive her to ruin. Holmes gave her a sympathetic look. Your motives were kind, though misdirected. But the provenance of these documents presents a new development. You did not abscond with the casket, but you did hide these papers here. Our culprit must have known of this hiding place. Before Hartley could reply, a rapping sounded at the door. A portly man in a grimy cap and coat stepped inside, a river worker. He held a muddy glove in his hand. Beg your pardon, ma'am, he said to Hartley, then turned to Holmes. I heard tell you're looking into a theft. I saw a cloaked figure last night burying something down by the riverbank, near the old embankment. Put shovel to ground round midnight. Holmes's eyes brightened. Your observation is invaluable, my good man. Could you point us to the exact spot? The worker nodded, describing a hidden inlet beneath a crumbling pier. It's near the floodgate, where the water meets the stones. I thought little of it at the time, but now... With that, he departed, leaving Hartley trembling as she watched the lumbering figure go. Holmes replaced the documents in his coat pocket and turned to Miss Hartley. You are free to return to London, Miss Hartley. Your conduct, though misguided, was not criminal. We shall secure these papers for Lady Chaucer's safety. As Watson guided her from the cottage, Holmes paused in the dying light, gazing toward the Thames. Watson, this development is most telling. The thief selected precisely this location to bury the casket, or so he hoped. He needed to delay our discovery until all evidence was beyond reach. I caught Holmes's gaze as he closed the trunk one final time. Who would risk exposure in such a manner? I asked. Holmes's expression grew grave. Someone who believed the river's tide would conceal their actions forever, and someone desperate enough to gamble on the cloak of darkness. Tomorrow, we explore that embankment, but for now, Watson, we have unearthed the first clear trace of buried treasure, and a new suspect lurks in the murk of midnight. He lifted his lantern from the table, and together we stepped into the darkening corridor, with each footstep drawing us closer to the hidden secrets beneath Gravesend's storied riverbanks. Chapter 4. A poisonous turn. The soft glow of the Baker Street lamplight flickered against the high ceiling as Holmes settled at his desk, his long form hunched over the brass-bound ledger in which he chronicled our investigations. Watson had just returned from escorting Miss Hartley back to her lodgings, and the flat was suffused with an air of cautious optimism. The smoke-stained codicils retrieved from the Red Cottage lay carefully wrapped in Holmes's writing desk drawer, awaiting delivery to Lady Chaucer. At 8 o'clock, a soft knock sounded at the door. "Tea, Mr. Holmes, as you requested," came Mrs. Hudson's voice, carrying a tray with 2 delicate china cups and a teapot, steaming gently. Holmes raised a single eyebrow in acknowledgement. The ritual of tea at Baker Street was sacrosanct, especially for him. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes said, extending a long-fingered hand. Watson and I exchanged glances, both of us accustomed to this domestic formality. Holmes poured the amber liquid with steady precision, inhaling its scent before raising the cup to his lips. I noted, some moments later, Holmes's hand falter slightly as he took his second sip. He set the cup down with unusual deliberation. "Watson," he said, his voice betraying a hint of strain, "there is something amiss." I hurried to his side. Holmes's usually unflappable countenance had taken on an ashen pallor. He winced and placed a hand on the desk for support. "Poison?" he croaked, his calm facade slipping to reveal genuine discomfort. I should have detected a faint metallic tang. He attempted a half-smile that wavered into a cough. Alarmed, I examined the teacup. The rich swirl of liquid reflected the lamplight, yet I could not see any sediment or cloudiness. "Holmes, what do you require?" I asked, heart pounding. He waved a hand. "Fetch the arsenic reagent from my medical case." Watson acted without hesitation, retrieving a small phial from the shelf. Holmes dabbed a minute drop of the reagent onto a stray drop of tea pooled on the saucer. Almost immediately the solution turned pale yellow, an unmistakable sign of arsenic. "It appears our friend intended to incapacitate me," Holmes whispered, pressing a handkerchief to his lips. "This was no accident. I helped him to the sofa where he sank with visible effort. His eyes, though weary, burned with resolve. "Why poison me at this juncture?" he murmured. "To distract me from the casket's true resting place, no doubt." My mind raced. The adversary must have learned of Holmes's impending trip to Gravesend and sought to derail our pursuit. Yet, who possessed both motive and opportunity to slip arsenic into his tea? Mrs. Hudson had served countless cups to Holmes and Watson without incident. Thus the hand must belong to someone intimately familiar with our routines. Holmes touched my arm. "Examine the teapot spout, Watson, for traces of foul play." I knelt and inspected it closely. A slight discoloration at the rim betrayed a crust of residue, which I scraped into a folded bit of paper. When Holmes applied another reagent test, the residue likewise reacted, confirming deliberate adulteration. "Someone prepared tea in my own cups," Holmes said, voice faint but firm. He leaned back, regaining some composure. This attempt was clumsy in execution, given the reagent's ease of detection. Our culprit wanted neither my death nor injury, but a diversion. He paused, eyes closing. A wave of nausea passed across his face. "Watson, bring me cold water. I must recover my strength if we are to continue." While Dr. Watson tended to Holmes, I sat by the desk, pondering the latest revelation. The poison had been introduced after the tea left the kitchen, yet before it reached Holmes's desk. Only 2 persons had access to that domain: Mrs. Hudson, whose integrity was beyond question, and Farrington, Lord Chaucer's solicitor, who had visited earlier to inspect drafts of the estate settlement. Moments later, Holmes accepted a glass of iced water. His complexion returned to its usual colour, though the tremor in his hand persisted. He lay back on the sofa, head propped on a cushion. "Now, Watson," he said, voice steady but low, "we must determine whose intrusion cost me this hardship." I fetched the lamp and trained its light upon the desk's surface. Holmes reached for his magnifying glass. "Look beyond the arsenic, Watson." Trace the set of fresh tobacco ash in the fireplace grate. Holmes rose unsteadily and crossed to the grate. There, among the smouldering embers, lay distinctive black flecks, far larger than the domestic briquettes Mrs. Hudson used. He picked one out with a matchstick. This is not standard English tobacco, but a variety set in its cut and texture, imported and expensive. I considered this. During our initial inquiries, we had noted Dr. Rivers's presence and Miss Hartley's re-emergence, yet neither had exhibited imported tobacco ash. Only one individual, to my recollection, was known to favour such a blend, Barnabas Farrington, whose office overlooked the docks and whose clientele included affluent merchants. Holmes allowed the ash to fall through his fingers. Farrington's office, perhaps? He would have known our investigation's focus, and his proximity would allow discreet entry to my quarters. He flicked the ash toward the hearth. Yet he would not serve me his own tobacco. He would need an excuse. He paused, remembering something. Farrington asked to see Lady Chaucer's newly recovered will yesterday. He borrowed my microscope to examine the ink composition, claiming professional interest. He left with my implement still in his pocket. He moved to a writing stand and retrieved his microscope. Under its lens, he examined the teapot's handle, discovering an incongruous smudge of ash lodged in a crevice. See here, the same fibres as that from the grate. The solicitor visited, tested the casket's contents at his leisure, and then slipped ash into the grate to cover his tracks. I frowned. But why poison you, simply to delay your trip to Gravesend, or for some deeper purpose? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Both, Watson. If I am indisposed, I cannot intercept Farrington's plans. He intends to remove the casket from Britain under cover of night, taking advantage of my absence. He paused to steady himself. We must confront him, and swiftly. But first, I require rest to regain my faculties. He sank back onto the sofa, and I gently covered him with a blanket. After an hour's careful observation, Holmes revived sufficiently to sit upright. "Watson," he said, voice firm, "alert the constables at Bow Street. Tell them to station officers near the Custom House docks this evening. When Farrington arrives with the casket, if indeed he attempts export, we shall apprehend him." I nodded, already moving to convey his instructions. As I left the room, Holmes closed his eyes, his breathing even. The arsenic attack would not have lasting effects on so resilient a constitution, but it had served its purpose to challenge his unassailable calm. Later, as dusk cast long shadows across Baker Street, Holmes roused himself. He donned his Inverness cape, cylinder hat, perched at a rakish angle. "Watson," he said, "to the docks." The game is far from over. Though the poison had struck at his body, it had only sharpened his resolve. Fresh from the brink of harm, Holmes's intellect burned brighter than ever, guiding us toward the denouement of the Crimson Casket's perilous journey. And so, with measured steps and unwavering determination, we strode into the London night, prepared to thwart the machinations of our cunning adversary. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Registry. The following morning found us beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Public Records Office, its hushed corridors lined with musty tomes and ink-stained registers. Holmes moved with purposeful quiet. A tall figure among the clerks and petitioners, his keen gaze sweeping each ledger and index card as if he could divine truth from mere paper. I trailed behind, clutching the letter of introduction that Lady Chaucer had procured, its seal still warm in my coat pocket. Holmes paused at the index for private estate matters and beckoned me over. "Watson, observe the entry for Grosvenor Square, Lady Chaucer's address. Note the solicitor's disbursements under Barnabas Farrington's name. There is mention here of a payment to K. Davy, Transit Services." He tapped the ledger with his forefinger. "This is most curious. Why would the casket's contents require transportation beyond the usual removal of personal effects?" I leaned in to read the cramped script. On the margin, in a delicate hand, was scrawled the date of departure, the 21st of May. "That is today," I whispered, astonished. "Surely Farrington has obtained permission to export goods legally, but why so secretive?" Holmes did not reply at once. He rose and requested access to the Transit Records section. There, behind locked glass cases, lay manifests and shipping permits. He examined them with a practiced eye until he located a crate exported under no permit at all, simply listed as miscellaneous antiques. Its dimensions matched precisely those of the Crimson Casket. The consignee was named only by initials, G.C. G.C., Holmes mused, could denote Grosvenor Casket, or perhaps a foreign buyer's initials masked by subterfuge. Either way, Watson, we have our publishing house, the Thames side warehouse of Miss Catherine Davy, the transit agent whom Farrington employed last spring. We secured certified copies of the relevant entries and departed the records office under grey skies that threatened rain. On the walk back, Watson observed, "Holmes, you anticipate Farrington's every manoeuvre. How do you propose we intercept him?" Holmes's lips curled in a faint grin. "Patience, Watson. We must first confirm the warehouse's layout and the shipping schedule. Let us call upon Miss Davy's office at Lime Wharf." The address led us to a row of discreet brick warehouses fringing the riverbank, their shutters closed and shutters stamped with mercantile insignia. A narrow gangway between nostril 14 and 16 led to a side entrance marked merely Transit and Company. Holmes lifted his walking cane to the lock and, with a quiet click, opened the door. Inside, the heady scent of timber polish and damp rope greeted us. A clerk sat at a high ledger desk, pen poised. Holmes presented the certified copies and spoke softly but firmly. "I require the unloading records for the crate dispatched this morning under the designation Miscellaneous Antiques." The clerk's gaze flicked nervously to the documents. He excused himself and disappeared behind a curtain into a storage area. Moments later he returned, brows furrowed. I see here the crate arrived at dawn. It was stored in Bay C, alongside the Persian carpets and porcelain shipment. It is scheduled for loading onto the SS Montrose this evening, bound for Rotterdam." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Thank you. Pray tell your manager that we will inspect the cargo before it sails." He placed the documents aside and glanced at me. "Watson, we must secure a viewing permit for Bay C, or better yet, enter before sundown. The docks grow perilous at that hour." I swallowed. The Thames side warehouses were known refuges for smugglers and black marketeers. "Are you certain, Holmes? We risk discovery." He waved my concern away. "The element of surprise is our ally. We shall approach at dusk. In the meantime, Watson, deliver these copies to Bow Street and request officers to be present at the quay by 7. Their uniforms will afford us cover." We parted ways, Holmes to arrange our nocturnal return, and I to assemble the constables. The day dragged on in anxious anticipation, but as evening fell, the air cooled and London's gaslights flickered to life. By 6:30, I had escorted half a dozen constables to a vantage point overlooking Bay C. Their unmarked presence awaited Holmes's signal. At 6:45, Holmes emerged from the shadows, clad in his Inverness cape and deerstalker, his manner as composed as ever. With a brief nod, he joined me behind a stack of timber crates. Through a narrow opening, we beheld the scene. Dockhands moved crates with practiced ease, while a solitary lantern shone from the SS Montrose's deck. There the Crimson Casket sat sealed within its crate, awaiting shipment. Holmes surveyed the surroundings. The path to the quay was patrolled sparsely, and the tide had risen to cushion passage along the lower wharf. He pointed to a small iron ladder leading to a platform built around the ship's hull. "We ascend there, Watson. One false move, and we risk plunging into the river, but we must gain access before the Montrose departs. We crept forward, passing beneath the lantern's scattered glow. Holmes produced from his pocket a slender waxed cord and fastened it to a protruding spike. In deft movements, he secured the line around his waist and then beckoned me to follow. Once upon the platform, he gestured toward an open hatch, just large enough to admit a single man. I clambered up first, Holmes close behind. The hatch led into a dimly lit cargo hold. Inside, Syrian carpets were draped along one bulkhead, and crates marked fragile glassware lined the floorboards. At the center lay the casket crate, its lid marked with the unmistakable outline of a bird motif. Holmes stepped forward, inspecting the crate's metal bands and hastily pried seal. A single scratch along the wood suggested it had already been reopened since arrival. "Ah," Holmes murmured. "Farrington has tampered here?" He intended to transfer the documents to the smaller case found at Gravesend, then rebury the casket elsewhere. He paused to study the scratch, yet he underestimated the constable's vigilance. Turning, he raised his hand. "Now, Watson." From our hidden vantage, 6 constables emerged, bayonets fixed. A shout rang out, "Hands above your heads, Mr. Farrington!" From the far corner, a man in a dusty suit emerged, eyes wide with astonishment. He flung up his hands. "Holmes, you have no right!" Holmes's cool voice cut through the din. "On the contrary, solicitor, we have every right. This casket contains stolen property. You will accompany these gentlemen at once." Farrington's shoulders slumped. The constables bound him in cord and led him away, while Holmes prized open the casket crate. Inside, the crimson box gleamed, unharmed. Holmes lifted it gently, his expression composed victory. Yet as he closed the lid, a faint movement caught his eye, a tremor in Farrington's face as he glanced back over his shoulder. Holmes met his gaze and inclined his head. "Pack up, Watson. Our adventure nears its end, but there remains one final revelation. With the casket reclaimed and the culprit in custody, we descended from the Montrose's hold into the damp London night. The constables closed ranks behind us, Farrington smirking in defeat. As the tide lapped quietly against the quay, Holmes and I exchanged glances, stern resolve in his eyes, relief coursing through my own heart. The trail had been treacherous, laced with poison, deceit, and secret vaults, but at last the Crimson Casket lay once more in safe hands. All that remained was to return it to Lady Chaucer, and to uncover the truth concealed within its silken folds. Chapter 6. The Silent Disclosure. Holmes summoned me to Baker Street before dawn, his sharp silhouette framed by the frosted window pane. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from his pipe, and his dark eyes gleamed with purpose. "At Grosvenor Square by first light, Watson," he instructed, donning his Inverness cape. "Lady Chaucer deserves the return of her casket, and, I suspect, an explanation of certain omissions." The city stirred in pale pastel hues as we drove toward the elegant terrace. Grosvenor Square lay hushed beneath a veil of dew, the clipped yews standing sentinel. Holmes led the way past cream-painted columns into the drawing room, where Lady Eleanor awaited, agitated but resolute. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so soon," she said, rising with graceful composure. "I pray the casket is safe." Holmes produced the crimson box, its jeweled surface gleaming even in the dim light. Lady Chaucer opened it reverently. Inside lay the silk-bound codicils and the sealed letters, save one small packet, conspicuously absent. Her brow furrowed. "There should be a bundle of correspondences from my late husband's banker," she murmured. "They were kept in the rear compartment." Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed. I note the rear clasp shows signs of forced release, despite the exterior having remained untouched. The missing packet was removed here, after our recovery." Lady Chaucer's eyes widened. But we were not alone in reclaiming it, were we? A knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Dr. Rivers and Barnabas Farrington, each summoned under the pretext of witnessing the casket's safe return. Rivers's face was drawn, Farrington's expression balanced between contrition and bravado. Holmes stood between them, calm as ever. "Madam, you have asked for full disclosure. I shall endeavour to supply it." Turning to Rivers, he said, "Doctor, you first confessed to examining the ciphered documents for philanthropic interest. In truth, you sought to suppress certain letters that implicated your family in the misappropriation of Lady Chaucer's foundation funds." Holmes produced the violet-hued sachet and the broken locket. You feared detection and believed removal of these pages would conceal your cousin's embezzlement. Rivers's shoulders slumped. "It is true. I discovered discrepancies in the charity accounts and feared ruin for my kin. I meant no lasting harm. I only sought to prevent scandal." Holmes's gaze shifted to Farrington. "Solicitor, you exploited that secrecy. You hoped to profit from the missing bank letters, planning to sell them to the highest bidder overseas. When poison failed to delay me effectively, you attempted to smuggle the entire casket." Farrington's jaw tightened. "You can accuse me of avarice, Holmes, but the foundation of your reasoning is circumstantial." Holmes tapped a parchment in his hand. "True, these acts stand apart, yet the final piece unites them." He approached Lady Chaucer's escritoire, lifted a framed miniature of her late husband, and revealed a hidden slit behind the frame. From it he drew the missing packet, its seal intact. Watson started. "But how did you deduce its concealment there?" Holmes smiled faintly. A lover of birds, Mr. Chaucer often kept his personal treasures near such portraits. I noted the slight bulge in the frame's backing during our first examination, evidence you, Doctor, overlooked in your haste. Lady Chaucer took the packet with trembling hands. "I confess I never considered the portrait." Holmes inclined his head. "Emotional attachments blind us to the mechanical truths of concealment." He laid the packet before her. "Here are the banker's letters, madam, evidence of your estate's integrity." Dr. Rivers covered his face. Farrington's shoulders sagged. Lady Chaucer opened the first letter and read. It confirmed that, despite mismanagement by others, her foundation's accounts were sound and that her husband had left clear instructions for its continuation. Relief washed over her features. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, "your misdeeds arose from fear and greed rather than malice. I forgive you both, but justice must be served." She nodded to the butler, who silently withdrew. Moments later, 2 constables entered at her signal. Rivers and Farrington were escorted away. Rivers to face internal inquiry at the Royal College of Physicians, Farrington to stand before the magistrate for conspiracy and theft. Holmes watched them go, expression unreadable. When the door closed behind the officers, Watson looked to Holmes. "Your reasoning was impeccable, as always." Holmes exhaled slowly. "The case demonstrates, Watson, that human folly is as predictable as chemical reactions. A man under pressure will leave a telltale residue, be it ash in a grate, a broken perfume sachet, or an inclination to hide evidence behind a frame." Lady Chaucer rose, eyes gleaming with gratitude. "Mr. Holmes, you have preserved my family's honor. Words cannot express my thanks." Holmes inclined his head. "Merely the resolution of a puzzle, madam. Yet I admire your generosity and mercy." As we took our leave, Lady Chaucer pressed a small velvet box into Holmes's hand. "A token of my gratitude." He opened it to find a gold signet bearing her family crest. He regarded it thoughtfully. "Thank you, Lady Chaucer. I confess I prefer the reward of truth." He replaced the token, slipping it into his coat pocket. Once in the cab, Watson ventured, "Holmes, do you ever tire of such revelations?" Holmes peered into the foggy streets. "On the contrary, Watson, each case renews one's faith in the power of observation and reasoning. Consider the portrait's concealment, the last clue, yet the most elementary." He tapped his temple. "When one knows what to look for, the world yields its secrets." Watson smiled. "And what of Miss Hartley? She suffered greatly in the course of these events." Holmes folded his arms. "Her motives were noble, albeit misdirected. I have written to Lady Chaucer recommending a modest pension and a position in the foundation she so loved." Watson nodded approvingly. "You temper justice with mercy, Holmes." Holmes allowed himself a rare, thoughtful smile. "Mercy, my dear Watson, is the companion of justice, and now, with the Crimson Casket restored and its contents intact, we may return to our quiet hearth at Baker Street until the next mystery summons us forth." Outside, the carriage wheels clattered over the cobbles, carrying us back to familiar streets. Behind us, Grosvenor Square receded into the mist, its secrets once again laid bare by Sherlock Holmes's singular brilliance. Chapter 7. The Penitent's Lament. A pale March sun barely dispelled the London mist as Holmes and I stepped from our cab onto the quiet street outside the Royal College of Physicians. Holmes's stride was steady, though his expression bore the weight of recent events. Behind us, Baker Street receded into fog, leaving only the echo of our carriage's wheels on the cobbles. Today we would see Dr. Philip Rivers answer to the charges of document tampering. Tomorrow Farrington would stand before the magistrate for his conspiracy. Yet Holmes moved forward not with triumph, but with measured reserve. Inside the grand stone hall of the college, we were met by Sir Reginald Harrington, the examiner of ethics, whose stern countenance softened slightly at the sight of Holmes. Rivers, pale and thin, awaited us in a high-backed chair near the dais. His once erect posture had slumped to a posture of defeat. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Harrington greeted. "Your testimony shall be invaluable. Dr. Rivers, you understand the gravity of your confession." Rivers nodded, his gaze fixed upon the polished marble floor. "I betrayed my oath," he murmured. "I sought to conceal evidence of my cousin's embezzlement. I corrupted a charitable legacy." He closed his eyes. "I have no excuse beyond fear." Holmes rose, addressing the assembly in calm, measured tones. "Sir, my observations revealed that Dr. Rivers introduced violet-scented fabric into Lady Chaucer's drawing-room cabinet, and later retrieved and burned sensitive codicils here, in this very study. His motive was the suppression of familial scandal. He produced Hartley's bow, now carefully pressed, and held it so that all might see. This item, found lodged in the grate, traced his movements. It was he who first removed the casket's ciphered pages from the red cabinet. The room buzzed with murmurs. Rivers's shoulders shuddered. Harrington spoke. "Dr. Rivers, your license is suspended pending further review. I trust you will submit fully to disciplinary proceedings." Rivers bowed his head. "Yes, sir." With that, the assembly rose, and Holmes and I withdrew into the corridor's hush. "Poor fellow," I said softly. "He has paid a heavy price for one moment's weakness." Holmes nodded. "Yet his contrition was genuine. We shall recommend his case be handled with leniency." He glanced at his pocket watch. "Now, Watson, we journey to Bow Street to witness one more disclosure before returning to Grosvenor Square." The afternoon sun lay low as we arrived at the Bow Street Magistrates' Court. Farrington, his threadbare suit hanging limply from his shoulders, was taken from a cell to face charges of theft and conspiracy. His solicitor's briefcase, once the repository of forged documents, now lay empty upon the bench. Inside the wood-panelled courtroom, Farrington sat with his hands clasped before him. He met Holmes's eye with a mixture of defiance and regret. Holmes addressed the court with precision. "Your worship," Barnabas Farrington orchestrated the removal of Lady Chaucer's casket and its contents in pursuit of personal enrichment. He engaged Transit and Company's complicity and attempted to smuggle the casket aboard the SS Montrose. His actions were premeditated and systematic. Holmes paused, allowing each word its weight. Yet I submit he acted only after believing the Reverend Rivers's coercive demands had neutralized all other obstacles. The magistrate tapped his gavel. "Mr. Farrington, you have heard the charges. How do you plead?" Farrington's voice emerged in a rasp. "Guilty, your worship." As officers led him away, Holmes turned to me. "One more errand remains, Watson. Miss Hartley has requested our counsel. We shall see her at the Grosvenor Avenue Mission House, where she now teaches." The Mission House, a modest establishment of pale brick and stained glass windows, stood a few streets from the square. Inside I found Miss Hartley among children, learning their letters, her countenance radiant in humble contentment. Holmes watched her for a moment before speaking. "Miss Hartley," he said, "you have endured much." The concealment of those codicils was an act of misguided compassion. He extended a letter from Lady Chaucer. "Her ladyship has arranged for a modest stipend and a formal position within her foundation. Your diligence and loyalty shall henceforth be employed for a worthy cause." Hartley's eyes filled with tears. "I never sought reward," she whispered, "only to protect my pupil, and by extension, the reputation of Lady Chaucer's good works." Holmes inclined his head. "Yet your courage in admitting your part has restored much more than reputation. It has salvaged trust." He handed her a small velvet pouch, a token of Lady Chaucer's esteem. Once outside, Watson observed Holmes, "You showed mercy to each with an understanding of motive and circumstance. Is that your gift? To temper justice with compassion?" Holmes's gaze lingered on the mission house's door. "I believe the capacity for redemption is as fundamental as the determination to punish wrongdoing. Each soul is capable of both." He turned to me. "Come, Watson, tonight we return to Baker Street. A final matter demands our attention." Night had fallen when we entered our sitting room, the fire crackling merrily. Holmes retrieved from his inner coat pocket the parcel we had recovered behind the portrait, a slender packet addressed to Lady Chaucer and her banker, Sir Reginald Marsh. He broke the seal and extracted several letters, their envelopes marked with the bank's crest. "Observe, Watson," he said, tapping one letter with a slender forefinger. "These correspondences reveal that Lady Chaucer's late husband was not merely a benefactor, but a clandestine negotiator of peace between certain continental banking houses. Had these papers fallen into unscrupulous hands, deeper financial ruptures might have ensued." I leaned forward, astonished. "So the stakes were greater than charity alone?" Holmes nodded gravely. "Indeed. The final secrets were never intended for public knowledge. Your average villain saw only monetary value, never grasping the diplomatic repercussions." He replaced the letters and looked up. "Tomorrow I shall dispatch these to Lady Chaucer under secure escort. By then the college boards will have decreed their judgment upon Rivers, and the magistrate will have set Farrington's sentence." He paused, hand at his chin, eyes distant. "Our case is nearly complete, Watson, yet one question remains. Who first orchestrated the theft in order to draw attention away from these very documents? There is a prime mover whose identity we have yet to confirm." I frowned. "Surely you refer to someone above Rivers and Farrington, one who knew of the hidden diplomatic correspondence." Holmes smiled thinly. Precisely, my dear Watson. We have unravelled the acts, but not yet the architect. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the mist-shrouded street. I joined him, following his line of sight into the London fog. Then our work is not yet done. Holmes turned at last, the spark in his eyes brighter than the embers in the grate. No, my friend, the final chapter awaits, and with it, the revelation of the true mastermind behind the Crimson Casket's disappearance. The mist thickened beyond the glass, as though the city itself held its breath for what was to come. And in that silent pause, I knew the denouement would be as unexpected as it was inevitable. Chapter 8. The Mastermind Revealed. The first pale tendrils of dawn had scarcely chased away the night's fog when Holmes strode through the marble vestibule of Sir Reginald Marsh's banking chambers. The air smelled of ledgers and polished brass. I followed close behind, the events of the past days moving in rapid procession through my mind: poisoned tea, hidden codicils, smuggled caskets, and repentant conspirators. Now Holmes sought the final truth, the identity of the architect who had set these wheels in motion. Inside the inner sanctum, Sir Reginald Marsh stood behind a high desk, adjusting the ribbon of a bound portfolio. His cheeks were pale but composed. At Holmes's entrance, he inclined his head in courteous greeting. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe this early call?" Holmes did not reply immediately. His dark eyes roved the ledgers piled upon the banker's desk, noting each stroke of pen and every slip of paper as though they whispered secrets only he could hear. At last he spoke, voice low and deliberate. "Sir Reginald, you are the first person my inquiries must name. Will you permit me to inspect your private records?" Marsh froze for a heartbeat, then gave a courteous bow. "Certainly, Mr. Holmes, though you must understand the sensitivity of these documents." Holmes laid a slender hand upon the portfolio. "Precisely, Sir Reginald. Sensitivity demanded that certain letters be spirited from Lady Chaucer's casket, letters which revealed high-level negotiations between London and the continent. Valuable to anyone wishing to profit from market instability, Holmes unfolded one of the banker's personal journals. Here, on the night of the theft, you recorded an urgent appointment at the Grosvenor Square residence, yet your visit was unannounced to the household. Pray explain." Marsh's composure flickered. He cleared his throat. "My visit was indeed unorthodox. Lady Chaucer and I discussed confidential financial matters, but I swear I sought only her confidence, not her papers." Holmes's expression remained inscrutable. He produced from his coat pocket the very ciphered scrap recovered behind her portrait. Marsh's eyes widened upon recognizing the elegant script. "This fragment, found concealed in your ladyship's drawing-room, bore the initial R.M. your own. You slipped it there to mask the fact that you extracted the banker's letters from the casket before its disappearance." Marsh's demeanor cracked. He ran a hand through his silver hair. "I admit, yes, I removed the letters, but theft was never my intention. I wished only to protect Lady Chaucer's reputation." Holmes leaned forward. "Protect by concealment? You then manipulated Dr. Rivers into burning the codicils and bribed Farrington to smuggle the casket. Your design was to eliminate troublesome evidence and profit from the sale of diplomatic correspondences." Marsh's shoulders sagged. The letters revealed negotiations so delicate that public knowledge would have destabilized markets abroad if they had fallen into hostile hands. He broke off, voice trembling. "I panicked, Holmes, and I recruited others to conceal the truth, believing I served a higher good." Holmes stood, lifting a sheaf of bank statements. "Your panic set in motion a chain of events that threatened lives and reputations alike. A doctor poisoned, a governess unjustly accused, and an entire family laid bare. All for what you deemed the greater good. His voice sharpened. "Yet good intentions do not excuse crime." Marsh bowed his head. "You are right. I have brought dishonor to all concerned." He extended a small envelope. "Here are the original letters, unaltered. Take them to Lady Chaucer, and tell her of my remorse." Holmes accepted the packet without a word. He placed it carefully in his inner coat pocket, as though committing it to safekeeping. Then, with measured courtesy, he turned to Marsh. "We shall convey your contrition to Lady Chaucer. In justice, you must face the consequences of your actions. The Bank of England will demand an inquiry, and the Privy Council must be informed of the diplomatic lapse. But I trust your cooperation will weigh in mitigation." Marsh nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I am prepared to accept whatever penalty is imposed." Holmes inclined his head slightly, then led me from the ornate chamber. Outside, the sky had brightened to pale blue, and the city's pulse quickened with the bustle of a London morning. We retraced our steps through Grosvenor Square, the mist receding as though drawn back by Holmes's singular insight. At Lady Eleanor's drawing room, we found her seated by the fire, hands folded in anxious expectation. Holmes presented the banker's envelope with solemn gravity. As she broke the seal and withdrew the letters, her face moved through shock, relief, and finally compassion. "Oh, Mr. Holmes," she said, voice trembling, "these letters, they confirm my husband's secret role in peace negotiations. If they had become public, the turmoil could have been catastrophic. I understand now why Sir Reginald acted as he did. Though misguidedly, I shall see that he is treated justly." She folded the banker's initial missive back into its envelope and laid it upon the hearth. His loyalty remains to be judged by his heart, not his errors. Rivers and Farrington, released on conditions of cooperation, arrived to witness the final reconciliation. Hartley, too, was present, her face radiant with hope and friendship. Holmes addressed the assembled company in his calm, authoritative tone. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "the true solution of the Crimson Casket case rests not only upon the unravelling of deceit, but upon the choices each individual made when confronted with fear or greed. Sir Reginald's actions were born of panic. Dr. Rivers acted out of familial devotion. Mr. Farrington was blinded by opportunity. Miss Hartley and Lady Chaucer, meanwhile, upheld principles of loyalty and compassion. Thus, all pieces have found their final place." Lady Eleanor rose and placed a hand upon Holmes's arm. "Your genius, sir, has restored more than my inheritance. It has restored my faith in humanity." She turned to Marsh. "And you, Reginald, shall be welcomed into the Foundation's service once you have answered to the bank. Mercy tempers justice, Mr. Holmes." Holmes inclined his head in assent. "Mercy, indeed, for those who show true repentance." He allowed himself a rare, gentle smile. Then, motioning to Watson, he added, "Come, Watson. Our work here is done." As we left Grosvenor Square, the spring sun shone brightly, illuminating spotless sidewalks and flowering magnolias. Holmes paused at the gate, inhaling the crisp air. "Watson," he said softly, "the case of the Crimson Casket is concluded. We have seen how human frailty and noble intent can intermingle, and we have seen how, through diligent observation and reason, chaos may be reclaimed." I nodded, admiration and relief swelling in my chest. "A singular triumph, Holmes. I shall long recall the lessons of this affair." He looked toward the sky, eyes distant yet resolute. "Indeed, Watson. Until the next mystery calls upon us, let us cherish the clarity of truth and the compassion that must accompany it." And with that we turned homeward, our figures receding into the bustling streets of London, where new enigmas awaited the keen mind of Sherlock Holmes.